le président de la République slovaque, Andrej Kiska.
Mr. President Kiska, it's a pleasure to have you here in the European Parliament today. The European Parliament is the heart of our democracy. Your speech is important for us to hear your ideas, your proposals. We are in the middle of the debate on the future of the European Union. To have the leaders in this Parliament is important because we want to have very good debate, very good meeting with the European leaders. I want to thank you another time for your visit here, Mr. President Kiska, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. President of European Parliament, honourable members of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. It was a great honour to accept this invitation to speak to this distinguished European auditorium. There is not more a representative place where any European politician could express his views on the future of our European project. Even the timing of my address here could hardly be better. In 2 days, Slovakia will celebrate the day when we made our first steps to democracy. It all began with young people, with students, whose courage to stand up against the regime had opened the door to the Velvet Revolution. 28 years ago, we went to streets and we called for freedom, human rights and democratic institutions. We forced the communist regime to dissolve after 4 decades. When I try to comprehend what we have achieved since the November 17, 1989, I almost cannot believe how far we have managed to get. I stand here as a president of a proud, free and democratic country, a member of the European Union, whose citizens can travel freely across the continent and use the same currency as countries from the opposite side of the inglorious Iron Curtain. None of it would be possible without an attractive power of peace and prosperity of the European project. We have succeeded because we had vital vision to become a part of the West, and because we were granted by opportunity to fulfill this dream through the European Union. Indeed, the success story of Slovakia is a success story of European integration. The timing of my speech here may be a lucky chance, but it's no coincidence that I have decided to begin with my remarks with the success story of the European integration in the part of the Europe I am coming from. Because in the middle of overwhelming pessimism of past few years, it seems almost out of place to talk about success. And yet, I am convinced that these doubts about the ability of the EU to cope with common challenges, to overcome present difficulties, are greatly exaggerated. Make no mistake, this doesn't make them less dangerous. They are in our heads. They influence sentiment in our societies. They tamper with our electoral decisions. In the end, they even drive our political and policy actions. So, I am not here to downplay dangers of populism, nationalism and extremism fueled by dissatisfaction in our societies and amplified by professionally orchestrated propaganda. I am not here to underestimate the consequences of Brexit or real challenges we need to address in the monetary union, border protection or elsewhere. But I am here to forcefully reject the idea there are some fundamental flaws in the architecture of the EU that will lead us to a bleak future, that something is rotten in the European project and it has been somehow responsible for the recent rise of extremism and nationalism. I am here to refuse a popular game of blame it on Brussels whenever it serves to cover some pressing domestic political issue. Let me point out where I do see weakness in upholding the EU project. No doubt, we defend the right cause, the project of peace, prosperity and human dignity. Facts speak volumes about the success of European integration. Of course, anti-European populists and extremists cannot beat us in providing solutions to improve the life of our citizens. But too often it looks like they beat us with their limitless confidence and passion for their case. We need real, stronger leadership, more confidence and devotion than acting and speaking up on behalf of the EU. We are aware of this problem in Slovakia. A month ago, we adopted a joint declaration of President, Speaker of Parliament and Prime Minister, which strongly and decisively reinforces our membership in the EU as a strategic interest without any alternative for the future of our country. We have agreed that we will communicate with our public responsibly, that we will not use double language abroad and at home about EU decisions. I consider this point especially important. We can see how often it is that EU is misused in political campaigns and how well it serves populists to present all victories as national and all defeats as European. And we can't get trapped by images of doom portrayed by those who would like to see us in another crisis. The EU is not a sinking ship, and we do not have to radically reform the way we operate. The most pressing issues can be solved by finishing what we have begun years ago. This is valid for Eurozone, Schengen or single market. Not all of our past decisions were picture perfect, and it will take some fine-tuning to overcome challenges we face. But we do not need a revolution. We just have to focus on what the EU members have mastered during 60 years of integration, solving the issues together, helping each other, and learning from each other. Solidarity and mutual trust are crucial to our success and our strength to overcome whatever comes next. But the recent migration crisis unfortunately left the wounds on our mutual trust. And it will take time and effort to eventually heal these wounds. So, let me just say today something what I used to repeat again and again during our heated domestic discussion. It is our moral duty to help children, women and men who flee their homes to save their lives. And Slovakia should never hesitate to show solidarity to our friends and partners in the EU. Ladies and gentlemen, Slovakia openly pursues its strategic interest to be in the core of the European integration. But I think we should focus on substance, on achieving convincing results, and do not lose too much energy in debates on the core or so-called multi-speed Europe. This discussion is not new, only player and context differ. There always have been and there always will be the EU countries willing to do more than others at some point of time. To explore more areas of cooperation is certainly not against the unity of the EU when agreed rules are respected. But it's crucial that the new initiative will be open to anyone interested. And I know for sure that Slovakia will not look for back seats when new projects will be on the table. Ladies and gentlemen, while we invest our effort into consolidation of our internal affairs, we shall not forget the role of the EU beyond its borders, because there are many threats out there with a significant impact on our common future, security and well-being. The EU today is an economic superpower, but its voice in security challenges around us is quite limited. Whether it's dealing with Russia over illegal annexation of Crimea and its support of separatists in Donbass, or situation in Syria or Libya. But the EU was built to be a project of peaceful economic integration, not a common military powerhouse. It always feels a bit cheap to criticize perceived lack of geopolitical prestige or a lack of operational capability during sudden crisis if one is not willing to equip the EU with proper abilities and powers, or if one is not ready to respect common actions when they matter the most. We in Slovakia are in favour of more ambitious foreign and security policy of the EU. I do not think it's sustainable to limit the EU to the role of money-raising benefactor after the dust settles. A benefactor trying to rebuild what has been left or destroyed by intervention of unscrupulous players on the international scene. Looking at the world today, it must be clear that the EU needs to transform itself into a more powerful global player. But I suggest we address this task rather honestly. No common policy can be efficient if it's pushed aside anytime someone deems it convenient. I am content that we have abandoned the idea of some European army as a starting point, because we need first to agree on what it really means to strengthen our cooperation in this field. Also, let me be clear, in Slovakia we have never seen this initiative as an attempt to compete with defense guarantees provided by NATO and a strategic partnership with the United States. But we see a lot of room where enhanced European cooperation can fill in and play a crucial role. Without merging our resources together, we would never be able to stand to our ambitions. That's why Slovakia welcomes the idea of permanent structured cooperation. While speaking about security, let me add one remark. I do follow an ongoing investigation in the United States about the scope of Russian interference in their presidential elections. Then I look back home where I can hardly see any action at all. And I always tell myself how lucky we are to live in Europe, where apparently no Russian influence is felt, as none is being intensively investigated. But on a more serious note, while we start talking about the European defence project, we should act together against imminent and dangerous threat we all face, the Russian propaganda and information war. It would be ridiculous to work on our defence hardware, but to leave this vulnerability open to attacks. Honestly, it would be a shame to let the European project fail because of our inability to halt the dissemination of hoaxes and fake news. Because propaganda has real consequences in our everyday lives. It shapes the moods in the EU, influences attitudes of our citizens. It seeks to spread chaos, to weaken our stability, to undermine trust of people in our institutions, and to make us afraid of every upcoming elections. One of the biggest threats comes from inside. We need to look into organised financial and personal schemes linked to media, non-governmental organisations, business entities or political parties. It's not secret that people in our countries get hired and used to destabilise our societies. In many cases, we simply ignore it or feel inappropriate to take actions. But Russia becomes more bold in their efforts to destabilise Europe, and it is ready to use any situation to this end. I really appreciate that this Parliament has approved a resolution on Russian propaganda last year. It was bold and much needed first step. It is clear the problem should be dealt with utmost political and expert attention on the European level, and it should lead to active defence. We shall not tolerate disinformation to interfere into our strategic interest. We must defend ourselves in words and in deeds. Ladies and gentlemen, I have mentioned the post-communist journey of my own country as a proof of success of the European integration. And I'll go even further, and I'll say that enlargement itself has been the most successful EU policy since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It has been the most important contribution of European politicians of the past 3 decades to keep the continent peaceful, free and prosperous. I have no doubt that our common future will be determined greatly by our capability to accept new members, by our ability to secure stability and prosperity of our neighbourhood. No matter how serious our internal challenges seem to be right now, we must not give up on enlargement. The fate of Western Balkans countries must remain one of our priorities. Yes, there are reasons to be disappointed by the lack of progress in reforms in overcoming all divisions. But rather than relax our attention, the EU should engage more. We have horrific experience of what could happen if Western Balkans stay at the margin of our attention. The security and stability of the region is so closely intertwined with the security and stability of the EU, so we cannot afford to give up on them. That means we cannot kill the vision of successful integration for them. A failure to offer hope is empowering adversities of prosperous, peaceful and integrated Europe. We simply cannot lose our friends in our neighbourhood, especially in the eastern neighbourhood. In this situation, it's ridiculous to spend months-long discussions on how to avoid any reference to membership vision instead of focusing on what we can offer them. Let me be more specific. Moldova. Moldova is one of the poorest parts of Europe. People there desperately long for better lives that can be achieved through reforms and realistic vision of a better future, something that the EU can offer the best. Without our help, they will be left vulnerable to Kremlin's interference. Georgia, a country that has been doing its best for well over a decade, our true ally in the region, but also a country that suffers from a recent war with Russia. A big part of its territory is still illegally occupied and people are left suffering. I touched the barbed wire fence that can divide your garden overnight and leave you with no access to your family. And yet, Georgia has not lost its strategic direction towards the West. So let's not put this bond at risk by our ignorance and indifference that could lead to unrepairable damage. And finally, Ukraine, our biggest neighbor, is fighting its war for territorial integrity while doing reforms at the same time. I often hear they don't do enough, but they will not do better if we lose our interest, cut off our support and leave them on their own. Moreover, if we will get back to business as usual with Putin's regime, if we lift the sanctions without forcing Kremlin to respect international law and principles, then we are willing to trade our own long-term security and stability over dubious individual short-term profits and interests. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the European integration embodies everything that is dear to us. Life in peace, life in dignity, where every human being is respected. It is our common heritage, our precious and verified plan to survive, our only meaningful path to the future. I am sure that the European Union has many great years ahead. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. President Kisku, for your speech. The debate on the future of the European Union is open. Thank you for your contribution.